Welcome to Finding Faith in Fandoms. I'm your host, Jacqueline Tetrault, and today I have two special guests. Returning to the podcast, we have theater artist Kenny Smith.
Hello, so happy to be here today.
And a new guest who I am lucky enough to call my boyfriend, Matthew Spellman. Matt, thank you so much for coming.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be on the show today. I'm a huge fan.
Yeah, Matt has been following this podcast pretty much since before it started because I think I was getting ready to release it right when we met and began dating. And today we're covering one of his favorite stories, so I knew I just had to invite him. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk a little about yourself.
Sure. I'm a former English teacher. I taught high school English for 5 years, and now I work in a charter school, and I run their extracurricular programming. So we do things like robotics and theater and speech and debate, so I run all those programs. But outside of work, I'm a huge fan of fiction and stories and how those stories connect to things that matter in our lives. So that's one of the reasons why I love this podcast so much. I just think it's so impactful, the ways and the conversations that are on here, and I'm just blessed to be able to listen to it and be a fan and now be a participant. So I'm glad to be here and talking about my favorite story, One Piece.
Yes, today our topic is the manga, anime, and recently adapted to live action series One Piece. The manga by Eiichiro Oda began coming out in 1997, and then the anime began in 1999. So this story has been ongoing for almost 3 decades now. At the time of this recording, it consists of 113 volumes and over 1,100 episodes of the anime series. So those stats make it the best-selling manga in history and the best-selling comic series printed in volume. Before we dive into One Piece, I wanted to talk a little bit just about the genre of anime. This is the first anime or manga story that we've covered on the podcast. And I know some Christians have had objections or apprehensions about anime because some of the content can be dark. Anime essentially is just Japanese animation, and that covers a whole range of topics and types of stories.
I think it's also worth saying animation is a much bigger medium in Japan than it is here in the West. In the West, we predominantly see it for kids shows and then a few other little things here and there. It is a major media in Japan, so it's not just covering, a handful of stories like we see in animation here. It's covering everything.
Yeah, and there are different cultural connotations because it reflects Eastern culture. And also there's the translation that happens if you're going from Japanese to English dubs, and different understandings of mythology and spirituality that may come across as like, oh, is that contrary to Christian teaching or Christian beliefs or understandings? But there are some truly beautiful anime movies and shows. Hayao Miyazaki's films by Studio Ghibli are absolutely beautiful and life-affirming. I know the Daughters of St. Paul have posted and written about the topic of anime in general, and just using discernment. You can't write off that whole genre or medium. There are some truly beautiful stories being told through the medium of anime.
It can be hard sometimes to see a culture that's so different from what we're used to, especially a culture that's been influenced by other religions such as Shinto and Buddhism, and to try to really understand what if this culture is another religion, what is just a cultural tradition. The reality is all these stories are depictions of people living the human condition, and regardless of what's going on with the religious influences, we can still get value out of exploring the human condition through these stories.
For most of the stories that we cover on the podcast, they're ones that I am very familiar with or have researched a lot. In this case, though, I am new to this fandom. I've only seen the first story arc of One Piece.
And for those of you listening who may also not be the most familiar with this story, we are predominantly going to be talking about just that first story arc. And part of the reason we're focusing on that is because the live-action adaptation has 1 season out, and that season covered that first story arc, and season 2 will be coming out soon, going further.
Yeah, so we thought this was a good time to sort of look back on how much of the story has been covered so far in the live action, which I think helped the whole franchise to find a wider audience over the past couple years. Many people who don't watch anime in general subscribe to Netflix, and so they saw this new thing come up, the One Piece live action, and so now they're being introduced to this world for the first time. I should give a warning. The show does include some more adult content or themes. It's cartoonish or stylized violence most of the time, but there are some more gruesome moments that are mentioned or happen off screen, and then you see the result. The manga and anime later on contain a lot of very sexualized art and promiscuity. And the first episode of the live action series does contain a scene with nudity.
And there's also some dark themes of oppression, slavery, that keep coming up throughout the story, even beyond what we'll be talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I feel like that One Piece starts off and it kind of seems like a happy-go-lucky story. It still has that at its heart, but it evolves and delves into such deeper and richer themes that impact the story in such profound ways.
So, Matt, do you want to explain the premise of One Piece for our listeners, for those who aren't familiar?
Sure, I'd love to. So, the basic premise is that it's a great era of piracy. And so, at the beginning of the series, there's this character, his name is Gold Roger, and he gets executed by the world's government. But before he dies, he says that he left all of his treasure in one piece. So this sets off this enormous boom, and all these people become pirates in this world. And so they take to the seas, everyone's trying to find the One Piece, and the story starts with our main character, whose name is Monkey D. Luffy. He finds himself in an interesting predicament, because he wants to be a pirate, he wants to find the One Piece and be the king of the pirates, but he can't swim. And the reason why he can't swim is because he ate a devil fruit that gives him the ability to stretch like rubber at the cost of not being able to ever swim again. And throughout the course of the narrative, he basically goes from island to island and he recruits new crew members to his cause.
It's an interesting world that the story takes place in, because some of it seems old-fashioned or pre-industrial in terms of their technology, but most of them wear what look like modern clothing, and their material culture looks strangely familiar.
There are some fan theories which are very unconfirmed that One Piece is actually a post-apocalyptic version of our world.
Yes.
And so remnants of our culture remain
That would make
throughout
sense.
One Piece.
Okay,
That's fascinating.
that's
yeah.
cool. So, Matt, you've been a fan of One Piece the longest. How did you first get introduced to it?
So I first became a fan, I was actually in Barnes & Noble, and I found a magazine called Shonen Jump, and at the time, this was like 2003, 2004, it was like a compilation magazine. So it had a bunch of different Japanese manga or Japanese comics in the magazine, and I was really into Yu-Gi-Oh cards at the time. So I saw a picture of Yu-Gi on the front cover, and I said, I want that. And I read through the complete magazine, and that's how I first read my first chapter of One Piece. And then from there, my school had a book fair, like one of those Scholastic book fairs, if you guys remember.
Yes.
Where you flip through the pages and order your books, and they were selling One Piece in volume form. So volume 1 was in the book fair, and I said, I need this in my life. I remember asking my dad to buy it for me, and then it came to the school, and that's how I got started. And then shortly after that, they brought the anime to America, and so I started watching it on TV on Saturday mornings, and I've been a fan ever since. I've been reading One Piece weekly for over 20 years, so...
Right, because the manga comes out weekly.
Correct, yeah. Mostly every week. Sometimes the author will take breaks, but mostly every week there's a new chapter. And so it's been a long time.
Do you remember what that first chapter was?
I think it was one of the chapters in which Buggy was introduced, so it was very early on in the story. So I jumped in very early on when it came to America.
Nice.
I discovered it because I was starting to get into anime in general, and I'd watched a lot of, shall we say, shorter shows. And eventually I was like, okay, I know there's a handful of really big, stupidly long shows that are very popular. I should probably pick one of them to start watching. And for some reason, I picked the biggest and longest. Initially, I was watching the anime English dub because I would often put it on when I was doing other things. I cleaned buildings, and so I would like put my phone on a chair and mop an area of the floor near it and then move my phone to another chair. And it does work fairly well for the anime because it takes a lot of time doing things sometimes. Like, one thing can happen, and then you watch 4 or 5 people react to that one thing, and it's like, I only need to see one reaction to know what's going on. But after a while, I got sucked into the show even more. I want to say probably around Water 7, for those who know, you know. And stopped trying to do other things while I watched the show because I was just so engrossed. And then when I caught up to the anime somewhere in Egghead, I started reading the manga from that point. And I'm now caught up with the manga. And I'm also going back to the beginning of the manga to read all the manga that I didn't read because I watched the anime.
So I started at a different place from you guys with the live action series, which is really good. Both fans and non-fans of the original content have enjoyed it and given it good reviews. It's well cast. The storytelling is really tight. I like stories about different types of people learning to work together and forming a team. So that kind of story already appealed to me. And I was just really impressed with the characters and the story structure. Each of the characters is entertaining and endearing in their own ways. And it's also a refreshingly optimistic story. So many stories today are nihilistic or cynical, whereas this story has an earnestness about it, particularly in Luffy and his philosophy that inspires everyone around him.
Yeah, it's very much like a feel-good story. The live action, you know, as someone coming from being a longtime fan watching live action, I felt like it was great, and I think one of the reasons why it's so great is because the author was directly involved in making it, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Especially for some of the casting choices. I heard him say to...
Iñaki Godoy.
The actor who plays Luffy, something to the effect of, you're the only one I can see playing Luffy.
Yeah, he has this joy about him, both the actor and the character.
Yeah.
You had to get that casting right, and they did. So instead of going strictly chronologically, I thought maybe we could talk about character by character and then maybe talk about the wider themes of the show. The world of One Piece is divided into 4 oceans. There's East Blue, West Blue, North Blue, South Blue. And this arc that we're talking about is when they're in the East Blue.
The Grand Line is the 5th ocean.
Okay.
But
one thing I really liked watching the live action was the way each of the main characters is introduced, and then we get flashbacks of their childhood, and we get the backstory that explains how they came to be the person they are and what is driving them. And we see each of those stories revisited in the finale, and that just seemed like such a perfect ending to the first season. It almost feels like a coming of age. Each of them has a dream that they're chasing, and they end up encouraging each other and inspiring each other to follow them. So the captain of this crew is Monkey D. Luffy. Kenny, I think you mentioned this first, and then I also read some of the Daughters of St. Paul were writing about the idea that Luffy is sort of a Christ figure in some ways. Do you want to talk at all about that?
yeah, so there are a handful of ways in which you can see Luffy as a Christ figure. I think the one that makes the most sense to focus on for this first story arc wrap-up is the way that he sort of starts his quote-unquote mission, which is how he goes around and he finds people and he sort of makes disciples of them. That's not quite the right word for the One Piece world, but he creates this family of folks who dream together and pursue their goals together. A Japanese word that is commonly used in the manga or the anime and is widely used by the community is nakama, which is a little hard to translate, but it kind of translates to found family. So everyone that Luffy invites onto his ship becomes part of his nakama. The thing that I really love about Luffy recruiting folks is he sees who they are, not who they project themselves as being. It's especially true with Nami. We'll get to that when we cover her. But he just sort of has this understanding of who they are. And he pursues that version of them.
Yeah, it's like, and it's a continuous pursuit too. As we get further in the story, we see characters who he's made friends with, they put up their guards again, and he has to break through that shell again. It's almost like he sees to the heart of who these people really are, even in moments where they don't want him to.
Yeah, he challenges them fairly soon after meeting each of them, starting with Kobe, who does not join his crew, but they still help each other. He asks each person he meets, what is it you want? What is your dream? He challenges them when they say it's one thing, but it's really another. So he makes them reflect, if they haven't already, and admit the truth about what their heart's desire is.
I do think it's interesting that the first person Luffy creates this bond with is someone whose dream is to become a Marine, which is antithetical to Luffy's dream of being a pirate. And I do feel like very much Kobe is part of Luffy's Nakama. It's just their dreams, the things they need to pursue, necessitate that they're in different areas. So that they can't be in the same crew, but they are still family apart from each other.
Yeah, so Luffy's big thing is he equates piracy with freedom. And that seems to be his core value. And he wants to set people free so that they can pursue their dreams. So the Marines in this world are basically like a paramilitary government / police force. And they're all about law and order, supposedly, at least. They say they stand for justice, but we learn that they have corruption in their ranks too.
The story does do a good job at showing us both good and bad pirates and good and bad Marines.
Yes. That feels very lifelike.
Yes.
Luffy seems to fill the archetype of the wise fool, someone who in some ways appears to be foolish. They don't seem to fit into the world as it is. They challenge elitism and convention, but under the surface they have a deeper wisdom. Even Jesus himself may fit that archetype because his teachings challenged the intellectual and religious elites of his time, but could also be understood by children or the childlike.
Yeah. It's kind of like if you think about the structure of the world being a certain way, and then humanity comes and they build on top of that structure, and they say this building is the norm. Characters like Luffy and Jesus can say, no, that's your construction. The norm is the world that you built on top of.
That's such a cool way of putting it. It's almost like a challenging of the status quo and challenging of what is man-built, and coming in and just shattering those cultural expectations, whether it's Jesus in our world or Luffy in the One Piece world.
Yeah. And so Luffy wants to follow in the footsteps of Gold Roger, the king of the pirates. So there's already this story that's very much alive in their culture of a past legendary king. Maybe similar to the Davidic kingdom and expectations for a messiah.
That's so cool. Okay.
I do want to say, the king of the pirates, I don't think comes with the connotation of being a ruler. Some people do get that impression within the world, but Luffy, in the future, at one point, does say, I don't want to rule over anyone. The king of the pirates is just the person who is the most free.
Yes, it all comes back to freedom for Luffy. Yeah.
And Gold Roger, being the previous king of the pirates, he didn't have like a kingdom or dominion. He had pirates under him. I'm not sure how many, but it wasn't like he ruled over the pirates.
Yeah, and we see that clash of values between freedom and power and the types of pirates that you see throughout the series. And we see in Luffy's backstory, when he was a child, he looked up to this pirate captain named Red-Haired Shanks. Luffy actually, as a kid, started out with this idea of piracy and wanting to prove himself that he was tough enough and man enough, I guess, to be a pirate. He actually tried to show that he wasn't afraid of getting hurt by stabbing himself in the face, which is how he gets his scar.
Do not do this at home.
Yeah.
It is not a good depiction of being tough and manly.
No. And Shanks has to explain to him,
Strength is not about scars.
yeah, and it's the lessons you learn from them that are important, and you didn't earn this one. It's not like a battle wound where you proved your courage or something like that. Shanks avoids violence when possible, and Luffy thinks that makes Shanks a coward at first. Shanks has an interaction with some mountain bandits who humiliate him and threaten and cause a mess for him, but Shanks just laughs it off. Like, it was nothing serious. Yeah, they made fun of me, so what? Luffy sees that initially as a weakness, but Shanks says to him, I don't remember if he uses this language in the anime, but in the live action he says, a man has to be strong, but he also has to be good. Strength and power in themselves don't matter. It's what you do with them that matters. And he sets an example as a protector. He protects the bar owner, Makino, his crew, and eventually Luffy, when Luffy is in danger.
That is very much a lesson that Luffy carries with him, is he continues to do everything he can to protect whoever he calls a friend throughout the entirety of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we actually see, later on in the story, we see a mirror scene of what happened with Shanks, where Luffy intentionally avoids violence and is ridiculed and mocked just as Shanks was. It's almost like a scene-for-scene recreation later on in the story. So it really just goes to show you how much he learned about true strength and true masculinity from Shanks himself. It also makes me think of turning the other cheek and kind of avoiding violence. And, Jesus came to Earth, and everyone thought he's going to be this big, tough guy. He's going to come in and liberate the people and all these things, and he came peacefully. And I think that that's something that I see a parallel here with Luffy. In the story.
Absolutely.
It's not to say that Luffy's always peaceful.
He's not.
No, and that's part of what makes him lovable, I think. And also, like Jesus, like God, he is a fierce defender of the people that he loves and of anyone who's suffering from oppression. He is a liberator. He sets people free from bondage, whether it's internal or external. But he only uses violence to defend. Whenever he meets people, Luffy sees their talent and their potential. He's always saying, like, hey, this guy's a good fighter, or you're a good cook. He calls them good, he recognizes their talent, and he calls them to follow him. Very much like Jesus calling the disciples.
And as he recognizes their talent, he's not afraid to also recognize his own lack of talent in those areas. And that's why he needs them.
Yeah, and there's a real humility there, I feel like, in recognizing that you don't have all the strength yourself. You have to rely on other people to get you through.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then he calls out and confronts situations of injustice. And some people that he meets are confused, like, what kind of pirate are you? Because he doesn't attack the innocent. He doesn't plunder and pillage like other pirates. And he says he wants to be a different kind of pirate. So he defies their expectations and categories. I noticed in the second episode of the live action show, the main antagonist of that episode is Buggy the clown pirate. He sort of challenges Luffy. He tries to isolate him and make him doubt everything that he learned from Shanks and his reliance on his crewmates. Buggy, meanwhile, has this whole audience held captive. He's forcing people to laugh at his circus act. And Luffy tells him, you can't make people love you. There's this connection that Luffy sees. Love and free will are connected. Love, for it to be real, has to be freely given.
Yeah.
Throughout One Piece, but it's especially obvious in this first arc where we hit several villains back to back to back to back. The villains always are the opposite of some quality of Luffy.
Yes.
And so seeing their opposite helps highlight what Luffy has.
Yes.
Buggy wants to be loved and adored for who he is, but he never is. There's always some act, there's always some charade that he puts on. This is why he's a clown. Yes, villains in One Piece tend to be eccentric. Buggy is a clown, and there's always some act or charade that he puts on, and if people ever love him, if they ever follow him, they are following that act, that charade. Whereas Luffy, who he is and how he fights for his friends, lets them love him for who he is.
Yeah.
And some of the other villains that we see, like, what's the cat claw guy's name? Kuro. He does not care for those under him.
Yeah, like at all. They're completely disposable. Yeah.
They are disposable if they need to be, and not to Luffy. Luffy refuses to use his crewmates as tools.
Yeah, it seems like each villain he faces was almost like a test of his character and his resolve. Kind of like the devil in our lives. Buggy even offers him, in the live action at least, he offers Luffy a place in his crew or his kingdom if Buggy were to become the king of the pirates. And Luffy flat out rejects it. Luffy will never give up on people. He pursues them, even if they reject his help and run away from him. We see this most clearly with Nami at the end of the East Blue arc. He also won't stand in the way of people's dreams, their free will, even when it seems like it's in their best interest for him to stop them.
I want to do a slightly spoilery correction.
Okay.
There is a time in the future where Luffy is pursuing someone to join their crew and then stops when he learns that that person's dream is to do something else. And then he lets them go.
Okay.
So he will pursue them as long as he sees that they're not being true to themselves, because he wants them to join him and to pursue their dreams together.
Yeah.
But when he sees, okay, this person has found a home, found a purpose, found a dream that is not compatible with my journey, he will let them go.
Yeah, it all ties back to freedom and free will, right?
Yes.
Like, he's going to love you and pursue you to the point where if your free will brings you in another direction, but that's true to you, he's going to let you go, right? And I think that it ties back to the free will in our lives, right? Like, we have the ability to choose, and it's a radical choice. And I think that Luffy allows the people he loves to make that choice for themselves.
And it's sort of like Kobe. So there's an element when we're drawing comparisons to Jesus where we say, oh, you free will, you chose a different path, you went down that way, and you're not following God. But that's not quite how it's portrayed in One Piece. Because with Kobe, we see he follows his dream to become a Marine, and that causes him to be separate from Luffy, but they'll always be friends. The central question in Luffy's mind is not, will you follow me or no? It's, will you pursue your dreams? Will you do what you are meant to do or no?
Yeah.
And following Luffy is one way to do those things, because Luffy will always encourage you to follow your dreams. But it's not the only way in Luffy's mind.
Yeah. It seems like it also has to do with following your moral compass, because Kobe has noble motivations for wanting to join the Marines. He wants to protect those who can't protect themselves.
And he wants to do that even when he's confronted with a very corrupt member of the Marines. Seeing that corruption almost makes him want to do it even more.
I know this plays out differently in the anime, but in the live action, there's some conflict within the crew when Luffy allows Zoro to fight his duel with Mihawk.
Yeah.
And Nami then blames Luffy for that because Zoro gets hurt. He almost dies, and Luffy could have stopped him. I thought that was very interesting and kind of similar to the idea of God's permissive will.
Wow, cool, yeah.
Yeah.
Because God gives us free will. He may want us to choose one thing, but he gives us the freedom to choose something else. And this is tricky, talking about divine providence or divine intervention. It's kind of getting into tricky territory. Like, why does God let bad things happen? Well, he wants us to still be able to make our own choices.
Could I ask you all a question? Do you have a favorite character in the story? Like our favorite crew member, just to make it specific to the Straw Hats?
Crew member? Okay.
Yeah. And we'll keep it within this first section of the story.
Hard to say. I might relate to Nami because she's like the big sister of the crew, and I'm a big sister. That sense of responsibility, and can you guys please take something seriously?
Yeah.
No, they're all fun, and it's fun to see the dynamic that they develop with each other.
I think for me it's got to be Luffy. He doesn't let anything get to him, and I appreciate that a lot. Well, except his friends getting hurt.
Yes.
Yeah, that definitely gets to him.
Yep.
My favorite is Zoro. I just love his loyalty that he has to Luffy in particular, but to all members of the crew, and just his steadfast devotion to his beliefs. I think it's so strong and such a unique part of his character as he goes throughout the story. Everyone in the crew has strong dreams, but I think a particular emphasis is put on Zoro and the strength of his dream and how he doesn't let it crumble in the face of adversity.
What is that dream?
I'm glad you asked, Kenny. Zoro's dream is to become the world's greatest swordsman. And we know that from basically the first line he says when Luffy finds him. And he pursues that throughout the entire course of the story.
And specifically, the way he would know if he becomes the world's greatest swordsman is if he's able to beat the current greatest swordsman.
Correct. Who is Mihawk, who we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Yes.
At least that's what everybody says. We haven't seen, Mihawk won a tournament or anything like that.
That's actually a really good point. Like how are you determined to be the world's greatest swordsman? Because we do see other strong characters who do fight with swords, like Shanks fights with a sword.
Yep.
But yeah, Mihawk is, I guess, just universally thought of as the world's greatest. So
Yeah, I feel like we see the most direct Japanese culture reflected in Zoro and his warrior training. When he's first introduced as a young adult, he's a bounty hunter. He captures pirates and often kills them. So he doesn't seem like a likely choice for Luffy's crew. But then I guess it's sort of like his save the cat moment. Luffy sees or hears about, depending on the version, how Zoro defended this little girl who was being harassed by the son of a marine captain. In some form, Zoro ends up accepting a punishment on behalf of this little girl. And he's actually tied to a cross in the Marine's yard to be left out there for a number of days. So we see a bit of Christ-like sacrifice from Zoro right away, serving as a substitute for someone else being punished.
And I think that's what convinces Luffy that this is a guy who needs to join his crew.
Exactly.
yeah.
Before that, he's like, oh, this guy's a strong fighter, this guy's kind of cool, but that's when Luffy's like, this is a good guy. He should be on my crew.
Yeah, it's almost like that's what impresses him the most. It's not the skill or the tough guy bravado, it's the self-sacrifice in the heart of who Zoro is. It's like we said earlier, Luffy sees to the heart, you know, and he sees to the heart of Zoro, and I think that this self-sacrifice defines Zoro's character throughout the series. You know, later, to be vague about a potential spoiler, later on in the story, there's a moment where he risks his life to save Luffy, and doing so, he almost sacrifices the potential of his dream, right? Because if he dies, he can no longer achieve his dream. So at that moment, he puts his dream on the line for Luffy's, which for him, becoming the world's greatest swordsman is more important than his life. So to put that dream on the line for someone else is the ultimate act of love for Zoro.
Yeah. A large part of his motivation is revealed in his backstory. So he started out as a child with this goal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. But then he had this sort of unlikely friendship with another student, Kuina. This wasn't really explained in the live action, but she was the daughter of his dojo master. And she was the best fighter in their dojo. Zoro actually resented her and wanted to become good enough that he could defeat her. But then she vents to him about her own doubts in herself. In the anime, her father doesn't want to pass on the dojo to her because she's a girl. They say it would be hard for her. And she's complaining like, yeah, when we grow up, the men are going to be bigger and stronger than the woman. And Zoro's like, don't talk like that. Don't set limits for yourself. And so they promise to continue training and help each other become better and stronger so that one of them becomes the world's greatest swordsman. Which kind of made me think of the verse in Proverbs 27:17. As iron sharpens iron, so a friend sharpens a friend. They turn their rivalry and competition into a shared pursuit of excellence.
For a time.
Yeah, it doesn't really get started. Like, they make that promise, and then immediately after, Kuina dies off screen.
By falling down the stairs.
Yeah.
Some freak accident.
Yeah.
We don't really know what happened. Fan speculation is that she had a sword as she tripped and fell down the stairs. But, yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid reading it being like, what? This is so random.
But, like, I kind of like that it's that way because
Yeah.
that's exactly how Zoro felt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the fact that we don't get more details just makes it confusing, which is what Zoro felt.
Yeah. It kind of puts us as readers, her watchers, in the same emotional state in a way as Zoro.
So Zoro's driven now not just by his personal ambition, and he does have a good amount of that, maybe an unhealthy amount of pride, but also wanting to honor his promise to Kuina. he asks Kuina's father for her sword that she carried. What is the name of it?
Wado Ichimoji?
Ichimondo?
Ichimondi?
Something like that.
It's a special sword. And Zoro already fought with 2 swords, but now he adds Kuina's as his 3rd one. So that's why he carries 3 swords always. A unique style. Or at least it seems to be unique. Do we see anyone else?
Nope.
No one else. That's actually a really good point.
Only
Yeah.
Zoro's crazy enough to fight with a sword in his mouth.
Yeah.
So then after Nami and Zoro, the 3rd crew member that Luffy picks up is Usopp.
Pinocchio.
Pretty much.
For real.
And I wondered if his name was a play on Aesop, because he seems to play the role of the boy who cried wolf, one of Aesop's fables.
I bet it definitely is. That's a great connection.
He also loves telling stories.
Exactly, yeah.
It definitely is, yeah.
Usopp is, in his town, known as a liar. He cries out that pirates are coming to attack the village when there are no pirates coming to attack the village. And also when there are pirates coming to attack the village, but no one believes him.
Yeah.
He has a weirdly long nose in the anime. Obviously, that was not adapted into the live action, but it is there in the anime, which it's definitely a reference to Pinocchio, right?
Yeah.
Oda's a huge Disney fan, so 100%. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he tells fantastical stories. But these stories, as we see his interaction with a wealthy orphaned girl in the town, the fantastical stories he tells her they are not true, but they're not so much meant to be lies as they're meant to be entertainment.
Yeah.
They're some of the only entertainment that this girl gets shut away in her mansion. She's sickly, so she doesn't get out much. The arc introducing Usopp does a really good job at showing the value of lies, especially in the anime. Because in the anime, we see moments of telling a story to get kids out of danger. We see Usopp's bravery in trying to protect the town, trying to protect the girl, Kaya. And some of the ways that he does that is telling stories, trying to scare off the pirates because he's got 8,000 men under his command. Or trying to get the kids to get out of danger by telling them, you know, you have to do this important mission somewhere else.
Yeah.
Usopp actually has a connection to Luffy already. His father, Yasopp, is part of Shanks' crew. So Luffy knew Usopp's dad when he was a kid. Yasopp left Usopp and his mother behind to pursue his life as a pirate, which is framed as a positive thing in the show because he was pursuing his dream and a life of adventure, and Usopp says that he admires his father for that.
I've learned that there's a lot of Japanese cultural baggage, specifically around fathers leaving their kids to do work.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In like a positive, like it's like looked on positively.
It's looked on positively, but it causes some cultural problems.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But so Usopp, from his childhood, longs for his father to return and believes that when his father comes home, that will make everything right, including his mother, who is sickly, getting better. But she ended up dying when Usopp was still a child.
I think it's worth saying, too, when Usopp cries out every day that the pirates are coming, part of that is his hope that the pirates will include his dad coming home.
And he wants to become a great warrior like his father. But his instinct is to hide, and he's not the same kind of great fighter that Luffy and Zoro are. He's great with a slingshot, so he's a good sharpshooter. He'll try to use trickery and his wits to win battles rather than direct physical force.
Yeah.
And I think that something that's interesting about Usopp is that even though he isn't as skilled as Luffy or Zoro, he does underestimate himself a lot, I think, throughout the course of the story. And seeing Usopp's belief in himself grow as the story continues, I think, is a major part of his character arc. As someone who starts off telling all these lies and telling all these fables and these stories, we start to see some of these stories coming true for Usopp as the journey continues. And I think he's such a cool character because, in many ways, he's the most accessible member of the crew for the reader because he's the most normal and down-to-earth as far as abilities go. Yeah. And so I think he provides a jumping on point for us as readers as well.
We also have the power trio,
Yeah.
Luffy and Zoro, and we haven't
Sanji.
talked about them yet, but Sanji, who are incredibly strong fighters and are not afraid to just jump in and start fighting almost anyone. Usopp is the necessary fear in the group that we need.
Yeah.
Usopp is not a crazy strong fighter, and so he does feel very reasonable fear when confronted with these dangers. He's not afraid of things that he doesn't need to be afraid of. He's very logical with his fear. And the logical thing in many of these crazy situations is to be terribly afraid.
Yeah.
The adventure in Syrup Village revolves around saving Kaya, who is almost murdered by Kuro, or Klahadore. He's a notorious pirate captain, but he's been pretending to be her butler for several years, hoping to steal her inheritance. It's kind of a situation of a wolf in sheep's clothing. They have to unmask him and set Kaya free because he's been holding her back. In the live action, he and his crew have actually been poisoning Kaya, and that's why she's sickly. So Kaya also has to learn to believe in herself and find the strength to overcome this person who's trying to exploit her.
The really painful moment in that story is when Usopp tries to unmask Klahadore, the butler, and say that it's the pirate captain Kuro, and Kaya believes it's just another one of Usopp's stories.
Mm-hmm.
That's the moment that confronts Usopp's lying tendencies and shows you the bad side of telling crazy stories.
Yeah, and then no one believes Usopp when he tries to sound the alarm and get help. So it's up to the Straw Hats to save Kaya and defend the town. One thing that is wonderful in the anime but was not included in the live action are the Usopp pirates.
Yeah, you love Usopp pirates.
The little kids that he trains, he calls them his crew. They're almost like his disciples. And when he moves on with Luffy, he sort of gives them their own commission and they carry on his mission. And then Usopp and Kaya have a sort of parting of the ways because they have separate dreams as well. But they hope to see each other again. Usopp decides to join Luffy's crew. Kaya stays where she lives, but decides to study to become a doctor. But they hope that their dreams will one day intersect again.
I think it's very important also to mention that at the end of the arc, Kaya grants Usopp particularly, but also just the Straw Hats in general, a ship.
Yeah, the ship is called the Going Merry, after Kaya's friend and colleague, Merry. The story varies a little bit on whether he named it or not, or whether it was named after him, and also whether he lives or dies.
Yeah, so again, in the original story, Merry lives and is fine, and he's the one who gives them the ship. In the live action, he's just killed by Kuro during the arc, and I remember watching it just being shocked. I was like, Merry dies? Like, crazy?
It is interesting. One of the biggest criticisms of early One Piece is that nobody dies. There feels like there's not real consequences. Mm-hmm. Because unless you're in a backstory and you fall down the stairs off screen,
Ouch, man!
Nobody really dies. And I thought it was a really interesting decision, especially knowing that Oda was involved in the making of the live action, to see a death during this arc. Mm-hmm. It makes me wonder if there are other things that Oda sort of wishes he could rewrite. Or maybe it was Hollywood saying we need more stakes and Oda reluctantly agreed. We don't know.
Yeah, and it's interesting as the live action continues, also seeing do they kill off more characters who live in the original story. It's kind of a cool thing for me. I like seeing the differences.
So then the next big arc is the Baratie, which is a floating restaurant on the sea. And that's where they meet Sanji, the sous chef for the head chef, Zeph.
Is he a sous chef or a waiter?
Sous chef.
He's a sous chef. He's put on waiter duty because Zeph is angry at him.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
in the
right,
in the
And
manga.
he makes that point, and that's why it's kind of a jab every time Zoro calls him a waiter.
Yeah, he does not like being a waiter. He wants to cook.
Yeah. I just learned this recently, that a sous chef does sort of the prep work. It prepares materials so that they're ready for the actual chef. I don't know if we want to reveal this. You guys may have to help me because I don't know the whole story. But I saw something online about Sanji's background.
Probably out of all the crew members, he has the most substantial backstory, because we get a backstory in this original arc about how he meets Zeph. But then much later in the story, we get a flashback about his origins and his family. And so that happens much later in the story, his history and who his parents are and how he comes to be. But
yeah, I don't think we need to get into that. And I think I want to use Sanji's own words for why Zeph is his father now.
Yeah.
His family from before is no longer his family. Zeph is.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into this theme of found family, Nakama,
Yes.
right? And family through sacrifice. So Sanji is working on a ship, and when he was a child, as a cook, waiter kind of character, and Zeph is a pirate. And so he invades the ship, and he's a pretty brutal pirate. He seems pretty violent, especially in the original story. Red leg Zeph, because he bloodies his enemies on his shoes. And then the ship crashes, and Sanji and Zeph are stranded on this floating island rock thing, and they clearly don't have enough food. They don't have a lot of resources. They're probably going to die. And Zeph gives Sanji a bag that's like a little bit of food, and then he has all these other big bags by him. And so Sanji feels that Zeph has taken all the food for himself. At one point, he goes to get it back and notices that in all these bags by Zeph, it's just gold. There's no food in the bags. And he then notices that Zeph's leg is missing, and that Zeph ate his own leg in order to keep himself alive so he could give all the food to Sanji.
Well, it varies, because in the manga and then in the live action later, Zeph ate his own leg. In the anime, he lost his leg in the shipwreck while saving Sanji from drowning.
Yeah.
It's gruesome, but I think it works thematically so well, of like literally sacrificing your body for the love of another person.
It is very interesting and made me think about Jesus and the dynamic of the Eucharist. It's sort of like an inverted Eucharist. In early church history, some arts used the imagery of a pelican. And this is not zoologically accurate, but there was this conception that a pelican would pierce itself and feed its own blood to its young. And so it became a symbol of Christ giving his blood for the church. And Zeph sacrifices his own flesh and blood in a roundabout way to feed Sanji. Not to directly. But what's kind of important is that Sanji doesn't recognize the sacrifice for a long time and thinks that Zeph is actually cheating him. He thinks Zeph is holding out on their resources. It's only later that he realizes that Zeph was saving him at greatest personal cost.
I want to talk about the two principles from that experience that inform the rest of Sanji's life. One, never waste food because it is precious. And two, you always feed the hungry.
Yes.
Going back to present time in the Baratier arc, people show up who are enemies, who will be violent, who will cause problems. And Sanji does not hesitate to feed them because they are starving and on the brink of death.
Yeah. Even if that means that if he feeds them, they can get healthy and then commit violence against him after.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is such a Christian attitude. For one thing, Jesus commands through his parables, it is our duty to feed the hungry. In the parable of the sheep and the goats, he says, we will be judged for whether we gave food to the hungry, a drink to the thirsty. I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. That kind of just making sure that people's basic needs are covered. And if someone is in need, it's your job to provide for them if you can.
And that's what Luffy sees in Sanji and what convinces Luffy, oh, this guy needs to be on my crew.
Yeah.
Is when he feeds that starving pirate who was kicked out of the restaurant. And Sanji comes and feeds him. And Luffy's like, you gotta join my crew.
This is the guy.
Yeah. And also the idea of loving your enemy, being kind and generous to someone, even if they may mean to harm you. There's vulnerability in that. So then finally, there's Nami, who is introduced fairly early on, but we don't get her full story or understand what she's about until a while later.
This is the character that we've been talking about. Luffy pursues you. He invites her to join his crew very early on. Before Usopp.
Yeah, so
Yes,
in the
yes.
manga, it's actually the beginning of the Buggy arc. She's hesitant because she doesn't necessarily trust pirates, and then she eventually forms an alliance with Luffy where she says, I'll temporarily go with you to, see if we can each get to our own goals. And then we really see her backstory and the evolution of her character in the Arlong arc, which for many people is the turning point of One Piece. I think when a lot of people get to this arc, they're like, wow, this story is really something else and something I want to continue reading or watching.
Yeah, it's very compelling. Nami is the most reluctant to open up to Luffy and to this crew that is forming. She's slow to trust them. She warms up to them gradually, it seems like. She seems very self-interested from the beginning until we learn what her true motivations are. She's a thief, and primarily a thief that steals from pirates.
Yeah, such a part of her character trait is just her love of money.
Yes.
A lot of times it's used for humor, and it continues throughout the story, but there's a deeper reason tied to that.
She's been betrayed. She's been hurt. It makes sense that she's very guarded against joining the crew. The reason she's been collecting money is to try to buy back a town that's been seized by pirates. So we do see that this sort of greed, almost played off as a joke, is actually a very deep and caring trait of hers. And it does continue through the story. And I think that's because so much of her life has been spent in insecurity, that she always wants money to help create that security. That is a trauma she evidently continues to carry through the rest of the show.
Mm-hmm. When we eventually get Nami's backstory, we learn that she had an adoptive mother. I'm not sure how you're supposed to say her name. It's spelled like the French words Belle Mère, which means beautiful mother. I think, do they say Bellemere?
I say Bellemere. I don't know. I say Bellemere.
I've always said Bellemere, but that might be because I watched the English dub.
So Bellemere was a Marine who almost died on a mission and was kind of on the point of giving up, but then she found Nami, either as a baby or as a little girl, and another girl named Nojiko, and decided to adopt them. They gave her the will to survive because she had to take care of them then.
These girls seem to be war orphans from whatever that mission was.
Yeah, it's very vague, but they're
Right.
definitely children of war in some way. And it doesn't seem like Nojiko and Nami aren't related.
No,
Right?
that's one of the first questions Bellemere asks Nojiko is like, is this your sister? No, it's just some kid I found.
Yeah. They're a pretty poor found family. They live in the same town where Bellemere grew up. Koko, or Kokoyashi village.
Yeah.
They have a tangerine orchard, but lots of people around them grow tangerines and sell them. So they don't have a lot of money, and Nami doesn't recognize the sacrifices that Bellemere has made to provide for her. She actually says at one point she wishes someone else had adopted her.
Yeah.
Which, she's a little kid, but it's kind of like the way throughout history we see in the Bible. The Hebrews, the Israelites, would complain against God even after everything that God did to bring them out of Egypt and to provide for them in the desert, saying that God didn't do enough for them or put them in a bad situation or a worse situation than before. They actually seem like they have reconciled or are in the process of reconciling when the Arlong pirates arrive. They're fish people. That's a race in
Fishmen.
this.
Yeah, it's like one of the first times in One Piece where we see a race or a species, I guess, other than human beings, right? They're not human.
And there's some history of conflict between the humans and fishmen. It sounds like there's been oppression of the fishmen. And then Arlong has a chip on his shoulder about fishmen are actually the superior race and we have to rise up above our human overlords. He talks a lot about that. So Arlong takes over Koko Village and tries to force each person to pay tribute. Their currency is berry.
Yeah, berries. Yeah.
100,000 berry per adult and 50,000 per child.
Which, a berry's roughly equivalent to a Japanese yen, which is approximately one American penny.
And Bellemere doesn't have enough money for herself and the two girls. And when Arlong and his men come to her house trying to collect, it actually plays out differently in the anime and live action. But the girls hide initially And it seems like Belmere might get away with lying or covering up their presence, but then she admits that actually she has 2 daughters. And they ask her, and her neighbors ask her, why would you admit that? Why didn't you just lie? And she said, because I would never deny that these are my daughters. So Belmere is very Christ-like in that moment, because she would not renounce her children even after they complained and renounced her. We saw Nami rejecting Belmere, saying, you're not my real mother. But then Belmere still claims Nami as her daughter.
And pays.
Yeah. Belmere offers her savings. She has 100,000 berry, but instead of offering that for her own life, she asks Arlong to take it for her 2 daughters. She redeems them with the money saved for herself. But then Arlong kills her in front of Nami and Nojiko. So Nami's carrying that trauma, but then also the circumstances are slightly different in the different versions of the story. Whether Nami went of her own initiative or was taken against her will. But somehow she ends up in Arlong's service. He finds out that she is great at reading and drawing maps, and she wants to learn about navigation. So she ends up joining his crew with the goal of someday buying back her village. She wants to buy her people's freedom so they won't have to pay tribute to Arlong anymore. And it's supposed to be a secret. In the anime, they actually do know that she has made this deal or is working towards that goal, but they don't let her know that they know. In the live action, no one else knows she's carrying that burden all on her own, and they hate her and see her as a traitor for joining the crew that killed her mother.
I love how the anime shows this moment, because Nami and the townspeople are constantly making decisions thinking about how the other will feel. Nami chooses not to tell the townspeople because she doesn't want to give them false hope if she can't do this. And the townspeople refuse to tell Nami that they know because they don't want her to feel trapped to do the thing to save them.
Yeah, it's so sweet and endearing, but also sad how the town seems to collectively just love Belmere and Nami and Nojiko. Genzo especially, but all the townsfolk want to do right by this family. It's not clear exactly who took care of Nojiko after Belmere died, but I'm guessing neighbors helped raise her and take care of her. Nami is in this situation where she has basically been sold into slavery. She is tattooed with a sawfish, the symbol of Arlong's crew. So from a young age, she is forced to work with these ruthless pirates, and honestly, it seems a lot like a modern-day slavery situation. She's chained up in a room and forced to work, drawing maps for them. She's branded as a member, basically as Arlong's property.
Yeah.
But she is operating under this belief that if she can steal or earn enough money, 100 million berry, then Arlong will free her town. She allows her community to hate her when she's actually sacrificing everything to free them. So sort of Christ-like in that way. But when she finally earns enough, and in the process she betrayed Luffy and the other Straw Hat pirates, Arlong breaks his word. He's been collaborating with the Marines, paying them off so that they won't interfere with his piracy. He tells the Marines where to find Nami's stash, and so everything that she earned through blood, sweat, and tears is confiscated. It's so heartbreaking to watch.
And this is 100 million berries, or roughly $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then Arlong just gets all the money and still gets to enslave.
Well, he splits it with the
He splits with the
Marines.
Marines.
The Marines
yeah.
get the money, and then he laughs off Nami's rage and says, oh, you can just earn it again.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you try to run away, then I'll take it out on the village. I wasn't sure if I understood what was happening in the live action, but it also seems like the village can't pay their tribute, and so he's going to punish them as well.
They've been eating into their reserves and selling off more and more of what they have, and they're getting to the point where they can no longer pay the tribute that he demands of them.
Yeah. They actually are willing to fight for Nami and fight for their town, but Nami says that would be just a massacre. Arlong will just kill all of them if they try to fight.
They say to Nami, you've done enough. You can run, live your life. We have to fight.
We'll just die here.
We have to fight. And she's like, but you'll die. And they're like, we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's such a spirit of sacrifice between each of them. And Nami even says, no, everything's fine. I'll just keep smiling and I'll keep working. I just need a little more time. And they're like, no, you've done enough. And so Nami hits her lowest point. This is such a famous scene, so emotional, and it carries over into the live action adaptation, almost frame for frame.
Yeah, they do a great job.
Nami is just in despair, the hurt of Arlong's betrayal and her grief over the village and everything she's sacrificed, everything she's about to lose. This is another more gruesome scene. She starts stabbing her arm where the tattoo is. It's like the part of herself that is marked by Arlong. But then Luffy appears and grabs her wrist, stays her hand. Nami's just breaking down.
It's silent for so long after he grabs her hand. And then she says, I told you to leave. And he says, you did. Wow, what's the next line?
You don't even know what's going on here.
He just says, I know.
and I don't.
Yeah, I don't. He doesn't try to explain away. He doesn't try to like over talk or take away the pain. He just stays in the moment with her in her pain, which I think is so telling of his character.
He says to Arlong later, you made our navigator cry. He sees her pain and he stands with her even though she has tried to push him away again and again. And finally at that moment, when she's at her lowest point, she realizes that she can't fix this on her own. That's what she's been trying to do. For so long, she's been trying to fix everyone's problems, relying only on herself. But now she finally says, Luffy, help me. Luffy doesn't say anything for a long moment, but he takes off his hat.
His symbol, his icon.
Yeah.
The hat was given to him by Shanks. It is his most precious possession. And she knows that. She's come to learn that. He takes off his hat and puts it on her head. It makes me think of the idea of being clothed with Christ. Do you know the moment in the Prophet Project when Hosea puts a new dress on Gomer? It's like a sign of being claimed and protected. He puts his most precious possession on her head and is like, of course I will. Of course I'll help you.
I think it's also worth saying that up until this point, there have been plenty of opportunities that Luffy could have done something, but because Nami asked him not to, he never did.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
He was still following her and trying to figure out what was going on, but he didn't intervene.
He was waiting for her to invite him into the problem. Or rather, he was waiting for her to take back the wall that she erected between him and the problem. He would not break that wall until she removed it.
It goes back to this free will thing. Like, he lets her have the free choice to call him for help instead of steamrolling his way in and taking charge of the situation himself.
Yeah. There's a conversation that Luffy and Zoro have in the live action. They've learned part of Nami's story. They've learned about Bellemere and the fact that Nami joined Arlong's crew, but they don't know her motivations for it yet. So Zoro and the others are expressing doubt over whether Nami is even a good person and if she's worth following. But Luffy says, I know Nami's good. I just need her to know it too.
Yeah, that's a great addition to the live action.
Yeah, it's so good. So then the finale of that arc is Luffy and the boys going with Nami to Arlong Park. I was surprised by how long this battle was in the anime.
Okay. When I was watching, I was so angry when watching the live action. This is the one part of the live action I didn't really enjoy because I feel like they took away so much of the action and the suspense of the Arlong Park battle. Like, one of Arlong's subordinates, his name is Hachi, and he's like this hilarious octopus fish man, and he's just not in the live action. It's disappointing. But yes, the battle was very long.
Well, all of the battles tend to be long because there's so much grandstanding. There's so much of the characters, especially the bad guys, just bragging about their abilities and how they're the best and For me as a viewer, I'm just like, cut to the chase. If you're going to fight, but have there be a point to it, like something that reveals character or
That's
something.
a genre trope. That's
Yeah.
like a Shonen Jump genre.
Yes.
And it comes from
Okay.
like the Dragon Ball heritage, which One Piece is inspired by, of like
Very inspired.
characters just talking about their power levels and how strong they are.
Gotcha.
For me, as a viewer and a reader, it reads as nostalgic just because I have such fond memories of those kind of moments.
But I'm on Jackie's side here. I think the anime really drags it out a lot. There are some moments I miss. I miss Hachi. I do miss, in the anime, we see Nojiko and Genzo representing the town doing what little they can in this fight against Arlong, which I do think is also valuable. And going back to Matt's point about this talking of power level, this is the moment where we get Luffy's big talk about, like, I can't do this. I can't cook. I can't lie. I can't navigate. I can't use swords. That's why I have my crew. Which is very much the inverse of that stereotype of talking about your power.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also the inverse of Arlong's belief, right?
Right.
Everyone being a tool for himself and for his mission, yeah.
Yeah, and that's also a big point when Luffy is confronting Arlong, and Arlong brags about how he supposedly lifted Nami up and helped her use her full potential as a map maker. He asks Luffy something like, would you have used her as effectively as I did? And Luffy is just furious.
Yeah.
Like,
Doesn't he break his sword at that moment?
Yeah.
And, like, snaps his, like...
Yeah, it's like, Nami is not a tool to be used. She is a person with hopes and dreams, and you tried to crush them.
And that's the same moment where they end up in the room where Nami drew all of her maps, and Luffy looks around and he sees the chain under the desk, he sees the blood on the quill, and he sees stacks and stacks and stacks of maps that Nami has drawn. And Nami's dream is to map the world. But these maps that she's drawn are maps from her time as a slave. And after he rebuts Arlong's word about using Nami, he proceeds to destroy the room that embodies her enslavement, even at his own cost. There's moments, I don't remember if they're in the live action as much, but there's moments in the anime where he prioritizes destroying the room above fighting Arlong.
And he gets hurt by it.
To get hurt.
Yeah.
And Nami's looking from outside the building, and she watches the desk flying out the window and papers flying out the window. And she understands in that moment that Luffy understands her. And tears.
Yeah, like, she is being set free. Her chains are being broken. She was in this situation being tricked and almost like selling her soul, and Luffy is finally setting her free from that. He brings down Arlong Park in that fight, and there's a moment when Nami and the others are not sure if Luffy is alive, but then he emerges from the rubble and he shouts to Nami this beautiful declaration. It's so simple but so powerful. Nami, you are our friend and we are your crew. So this affirmation of her identity and the fact that she belongs with them, that she has a place with them.
It's a scripture passage. I'm forgetting the reference right now. But it talks about setting the captives free and breaking the chains. And I always thought that was saying the same thing twice. But I recently learned from a theological professor that that's actually two different things. There's setting the prisoners free, and then there's taking the chains that had previously bound them and breaking them, ending the symbol, destroying the room where the slavery happened. Yeah. It was not enough to just pull her out of the slavery.
Yeah.
The embodiment, the physical stain on the world left by her slavery needed to be destroyed.
And he breaks Arlong's nose. His nose is snapped.
And you mentioned all the maps that Nami made. Like, yes, she would have pursued map making on her own, but he was forcing her to make maps so that he could expand his empire and his capacity to oppress people and cause harm to others. But now with Luffy, she can use her map making and navigation skills for good people and for good goals.
You know, like pirates.
Like piracy. Yeah.
So throughout this arc, we see a few different themes. One is the idea of adoption, whether literal or symbolic. because each of these characters has some kind of mentor figure in the past who then inspires them as they are growing into adulthood, because they're all in their late teens or early 20s, approximately, at least at the start of the story. We also see some tension between these older and younger generations of characters. I really like stories like that, where you see multiple generations interacting. These younger characters are, in different ways, sometimes frustrated with their lives and may take it out on their mentors, like Luffy yelling at Shanks, Nami yelling at Bellemere. Zeph and Sanji's relationship is particularly contentious. They love each other, but they show it in a very roundabout way. Different generations clash because the younger generation wants to be or do something slightly different from those who came before them, even if they want to be in the same line of work. Like, Zeph and Sanji are both chefs, but Sanji wants to be more creative, not stick to standard cooking methods. And there's an interesting conversation in the live action show that I don't think happens in manga or anime. Yeah. After Sanji has left with the Straw Hat Pirates, Zeph receives a visit from Vice Admiral Garp, who is not introduced until later in the original story. Yeah. He's a Marine official. Is it okay to say? He's also Luffy's grandfather. So in the live action, they meet each other. Like, they had never met before, but they're both part of this older generation.
Garp and Zeph, yeah.
Yeah. Zeph chose to retire from piracy in order to make way for the new generation coming up. Whereas Garp basically has no respect for Luffy and his generation. He describes them as impulsive children. He tried to mentor and train Luffy, but just couldn't get him in line. And Garp doesn't want to step aside for the younger folks. And I noticed Zeph kind of makes a metaphor of the wine that he's serving. He describes it as, when they're arguing about the younger generation, he says, perfectly aged, ready to be enjoyed. Leave it too long and it'll go bad. And then Garp is like, why not just serve whiskey? Which it occurred to me, whiskey usually is better the older it is. Listening to that, I was like, wait a second, is that... I don't think it's quite the same metaphor, but it's similar to Jesus' metaphor of putting new wine in new wineskins rather than old. He uses that imagery in all three of the synoptic gospels. New wine would still have to ferment, so if you put it into an old wineskin, the skin would burst because it was already used and weathered. So new wine would have to go in a new wineskin that would expand as the wine fermented.
Developing further this idea of inheritance, one of the major thematic explorations is this idea of inherited will, which the One Piece community and Oda really pushes throughout the story. And it comes from chapter 145. It was originally titled in English as Carrying on His Will. And it's Oda's idea that one's will, dreams, goals, and ambitions are passed on and carried down by the next generation. And I think that we see this in multiple places throughout the story. We see Gold Roger starts the story by passing down his will to society and to these new and upcoming pirates. We see Shanks giving Luffy his hat. Before he's really ready to be a pirate, he just has this dream of being one, but he doesn't really have the skills to do it yet. But Shanks still gives him his hat.
And tells him to return it only after he achieves his dream.
Yeah, only after he achieves this dream. We kind of see a similar thing with Kuina's father, who gives Zoro her sword, even though he's not the world's greatest swordsman, but he still entrusts that dream to him. We see it with Zeph. The reason why Zeph saves Sanji is because they both have this dream of finding the All Blue, which is this ocean where all fish and all seafood exist in one sea. And, of course, Bellemere sacrificing her life to her children to carry on their legacy. This idea of an inherited will or will being passed down from one generation to the other, it reminded me of this idea of grace, right? The fact that we receive this grace from God. These younger versions of our main characters don't deserve what they're given by their mentors, but they're given it anyway, and so.
Yeah, I wonder if a better phrasing might be like legacy or passing the torch. But yeah, the grace of God is not based on what we deserve at all. It's a gift freely given. Throughout this series, we see these ideological and spiritual battles, particularly between Luffy and the different pirates he encounters. And their different ideas of what it means to be a pirate.
Yeah, 100%. We got to touch about this earlier,
Yeah.
but it's like Luffy's vision of being a pirate is so antithetical to pirates in the One Piece world's definition of being a pirate, but also it's antithetical to, I think, what we as readers think about as pirates in general. Like, we think of them as kind of like fierce plunderers who are fighting, and like, I don't necessarily equate pirates with freedom, but that's completely what Luffy's definition of being a pirate is. It's like, being a pirate will allow him to be the most free. And what's interesting for him is, I feel like, if at any point this isn't the case, if piracy for him, or even finding the One Piece, in any way limits his freedom, he wouldn't do it anymore. His real goal was to be free and to be the most free.
I do want to say, modern perception of pirates, especially pirates from the Caribbean Seas era, is actually quite skewed towards almost like well, even the Viking idea is a little bit skewed. There was a lot more pursuit of freedom in what pirates actually were than our modern media tends to portray.
Yeah, interesting.
For instance, there was no small number of formerly enslaved peoples who became pirates. They tended to be much more diverse crews because they would pick up various outcasts from all sorts of places all around the seas. There is a lot of interesting historical research to be done, in historical tidbits to be gathered in that field.
You just have to wonder how much of this did Oda have in his mind as he was creating the story. And how much did he know? I think I bet that he knew a fair amount. I think One Piece is incredibly well researched.
And we see all these more villainous pirates like Buggy, Kuro, Alvida, Don Krieg, Arlong. Their focus is their own pride, their ego, selfishness, hatred. Whereas Luffy's vision of piracy is about freedom and friendship and adventure. And he wants a crew that always has each other's backs, not one where everyone's in competition. He is a captain, and I think part of his arc is learning what it means to be a captain, but that just means he's loyal to his crew and they are loyal to him and to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting how the enemies of One Piece are divided up. We have the pirates, then we also have the Marines, who I think become much more pronounced as the story goes on.
And it gets really interesting when you start touching on the warlords, who were formerly pirates, but then were picked up by the Marines and forgiven their bounties so that they could fight on behalf of the Marines.
Right. So they're still doing the same stuff. They're just, like, qualified to do it now.
That's sort of like privateers in real life history. Yeah, they would basically be like government-sponsored pirates, which could lead to some interesting dynamics. The Marines are kind of to Luffy what the scribes and Pharisees were to Jesus, because they're supposed to be leaders and arbiters of justice, but they turn out to be full of corruption. There are good ones and bad ones, just as there were good and bad Pharisees and players in Jesus' time. Part of Kobe's arc in the live action is discovering the hypocrisy that he wasn't aware of in the Marines.
The Marines' theme is justice.
Yeah.
But every Marine needs to develop their own idea of what justice is. And that's something that is explicitly called out in the live action that Garp says to Kobe. It's a little less explicit in the manga, but we do know that the different admirals and vice admirals in the Marines have different ideas, different types of justices that they follow.
Right.
Yeah.
This kind of veers into spoiler territory, but like, you get a much larger sense of how the world government is structured, and also who's at the head of the world government and how that impacts the story. But it kind of begs the question, can you be a good person in an organization that's not good? It kind of brings up these philosophical questions, and we start to learn more about each organization in the world.
In the live action, when Luffy is fighting Kuro left behind piracy because it made him a target. He says there's no freedom with a target on your back. But Luffy says that Kuro gave up on his dream, gave up on the idea of freedom. So I think for Luffy, his pursuit of freedom through piracy, despite the danger that it puts him in, because he does become a wanted man by the end of this arc, it's sort of similar to the idea of finding freedom in Christ, but losing worldly status and security as a result. There's a kind of peace that comes with that, even though it means your life is going to be more difficult now. that first season of the live action show ends with this scene, a casting off ceremony, where
it's awesome.
each of them, the 5 of them, have finally come together. They each bring their talents or mementos from home. They bring some tangerine trees from Nami's mother's orchard so that she has a piece of home with her. And then they all, I don't know why they put their feet.
They get like a barrel. It gets like a rum barrel or something.
It's kind of similar to how like a sports team might all put
like
their
the
hands
huddle.
in the center. Instead of hands, it's feet.
It's like
on
the
a barrel.
sports huddle, but piracy version.
Yeah.
Maybe because Sanjay always fights with his feet, his legs, instead
I don't know why.
of his hands.
That's actually a good point. Maybe it's like, so they all kind of put their feet, each of them puts their feet on the barrel and just talks about their dream as they're getting closer into the Grand Line, which is the main stretch of ocean that their journey will take place on. And so it really wraps up the first collection of story arcs before we get into where a lot of the heavier action will happen.
And in the live action, we see, as each of them states their dream, we see a flashback of them of their childhood. It really feels like a coming full circle moment. They haven't fulfilled their dreams yet, but they've reached the point where their dreams are more possible than ever. And they're finally embarking on that journey as a solidified team and family.
It's a really cool moment.
Yeah, it was very well done.
Yeah. Perfect place to end the first season of the live action.
Yeah. If I never saw another episode or read a chapter or anything, I would be satisfied with that story. It was beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's great to know that there's more coming with these characters.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because originally when Oda was writing the manga, he only intended it to last 5 years. And so he very well could have used this as a jumping off point and stopped. But then I think his ideas just kept growing organically out of each other. And so the story kept becoming longer and longer and longer. So now there's like a trope in the fan base where it's like every 5 years he'll say it's going to end in 5 years, and it never does. So it just keeps going and going.
I do know what that's like as a writer. You think this part of the story will be just, a few paragraphs here. Oh no, that needs to be its own chapter. Oh no, this needs to be a much longer arc. This is going to grow much bigger than intended.
We joke a lot about the length of One Piece, and we talk about it is a legitimate problem to watch all of this content, but I think in a large part it is the length that makes it so impactful, because he's really able to flesh out characters and really help you understand them and their motivations and what drives them, and therefore the conflicts that are created when other characters come in.
Yeah.
There's so much he can do with so little now because he's established all the characters so well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for me, being a longtime reader, I tie certain moments of my life to certain parts of the story. So I remember reading Arlong Park when I was 12, and then seeing a revelation when I'm 22 and reading it being tied back later in the story. So it's really such a nostalgic trip for me to experience the story and to talk about it now as a 34-year-old man, talking about a story I loved when I was 12. So it's really cool. Yeah. I
think that's all I've got. Is there anything else you guys want to touch on or think that we need to mention?
I don't think so. I think that we could go on for hours about One Piece, and so I'd love to revisit this in a future episode at some point so we can talk about more of the story.
Yeah.
Maybe.
This is us just talking about the first 50-ish episodes of One Piece, and there is literally 22 times that much content out there. I want to encourage the listeners to give One Piece a try. I understand it can be a lot, but there are multiple ways to dip your toe into the water now. There's the anime, of course, there's the live action, and there's the manga.
Yeah.
All of them are good, all of them are valid. Just give it a try.
Yeah, and I think that one of the barriers is art style. I think some people just don't love the One Piece art style, and so either keep going with it, give it a shot, or just try the live action and see it in a different light. It's definitely worthwhile.
Well, thank you guys so much for taking the time to talk about this and for sharing your perspectives, your expertise.
Thank you, Jackie, for doing a One Piece episode.
Yeah,
You're welcome. My absolute pleasure.
It was a pleasure to be on the show as a fan. Thank you for letting me be on it.
You're welcome.
Very much.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us We'll include links in the show notes for more resources related to One Piece. Please keep us in your prayers. Thanks for being part of the fandom. God bless.